Welcome back to Lecture 5. To illustrate the concept of a predicate, let me use the same running example that we used in the first segment, and in particular, let me pick a couple sentences from that example. The first sentence is, Flipper is a dolphin. I think we all agree that this declarative statement is either true or false, so it is definitely a proposition. The second sentence from our running example is, something is a dolphin. Now I'm going to use the letter or the variable x instead of the word something, but that doesn't make a difference here. It just looks a little bit more formal because I'm using a variable name. You'll see why in a little while. But the point is, this sentence means something, let's call it x, even though we don't know what it is a dolphin. So is this sentence a proposition? Well, remember from lecture 1 that we argued at length that this kind of sentences is not a proposition. Why is that? Because this sentence does not have a truth value. It simply cannot, because it doesn't even have a meaning. And the reason is we don't know the value of x. And until and unless we know the value of x, there's no way to determine the meaning of this sentence, let alone whether it's true or false. So far in our study of logic, we've made a big deal about the difference between propositions, like this one, and sentences that are not propositions, like this one. In fact, up to this point, we have rejected everything that is not a proposition. But now that we are moving beyond propositional logic, we actually want to focus our attention on this kind of statements. These statements can be broken into two parts, namely a subject and a predicate. In this particular example, the subject is x. That is, it is something whose identity is not revealed yet. So that's why we call it with the variable x. But that is the subject of this sentence. And the rest of the sentence is a dolphin, is the predicate. That's what we called the verb phrase in the previous segment. So what is a predicate? Well, the predicate is either a verb or a verb phrase. But a more general way of looking at it is that a predicate is a property that is asserted about the subject. In other words, what this sentence says is that the subject X has the property of being a dolphin. So is a dolphin is the predicate in this sentence. So now that we have identified the concepts of subjects and predicates, let's try and represent them in a compact way, as is usually done in formal languages like logic. So the subject is easy. It's already a one-letter variable, so we might as well just keep it. X is a subject. Now, how are we going to represent the predicate? Well, let's choose a name for the predicate. In this case, let's choose D for dolphin. And let's write the name of the predicate D in front of the subject and surround the subject with parentheses. That is the notation that we're going to use. And we're going to read this as D of X or dx. So again, D is simply the predicate is a dolphin. You can call it whatever you want. You can use another letter than D. You can use a whole word. You could have used the word dolphin instead of D. Doesn't really matter. Just give it a name. The important fact is that D is the predicate. D of X is something slightly different. In fact, here is a new definition. D of x is called a propositional function. In particular, it is this propositional function. X is a dolphin. So the meaning of dx or d of x is simply x is a dolphin, since d is the predicate, is a dolphin. So the important thing here is, what is a propositional function? Well, it's all in the name. First of all, it's a function. And notice the notation really looks like a function, right? This is almost like f of x. Well, it is a function. In fact, the name of the function is the name of the predicate. And why is it called a propositional function? Well, that's the important point. Once you specify a specific value for x, then in essence you can call that function. And what it's going to return is what? You got it, a proposition. In fact, let's provide as input, quote unquote, to the function d of x, the constant flipper. What we get then in this notation is d of flipper, or d flipper. Well, what is that? Well, it's a proposition. In fact, it's this proposition. Flipper is a dolphin up here. So to wrap up this example, what we just did is basically gave ourselves a way of representing these kind of statements, which are not propositions, using this kind of notation. D of x is our notation for this kind of statements. And if you provide a specific value for x, you get another expression like this one that allows you to still represent propositions. But the difference between this kind of propositions, D of flipper, and the proposition P that we've been using so far, is that this notation distinguishes between the subject of the proposition and the predicate of the proposition. So to wrap up this segment, let's review the new concept or concepts here. First, a predicate. That's just what you call a verb phrase. But really what it is a property that a subject in a sentence may or may not have, like is a dolphin. So just remember the important distinction between the predicate D, which is just the name for a property, and the propositional function D of x. The difference is that D is just a predicate. There's not much you can do with it, whereas D of x is a function that expects an argument, quote unquote, and once you give it that argument, it returns a proposition, like we did just here. It's important to realize that neither the predicate D nor the propositional function D of x is a proposition. To have a proposition, you must instantiate all of the variables, in this case there's only one, the x, with a specific object, in this case, flipper. So this is the only proposition on this slide, and it states that flipper is a dolphin. It is this proposition. So the only new thing here again is that the proposition explicitly shows the distinction between two parts inside the proposition, the subject and the verb phrase, and it also allows us to represent sentences that are not propositions like this one by using variables like here.